Hey guys, welcome back to The Mind of Brandon, and welcome back to another Sunday of Science and Spirituality. As indicated by the title of this video, 10 Vital Organs Debunk Evolution. Yeah, I'm not too sure about that one. So the inspiration for today's video is actually a pretty long comment that I received on a previous video of mine. So let's go ahead and have a look at that comment.
Rest in peace, Darwinism, 1851 to 2017. My proposal here puts a knife into the heart of the dying dog of Darwin. I have a reasonable question that I would like answered if you wish anyone to take evolution seriously. Man has 10 interdependent vital organs and support systems. Fact. Man needs all 10 of his vital organs or he dies. Fact.
So when I first read this bit about how there's specifically 10 vital organs, it occurred to me, I don't know if that's even true. I have to actually fact check this individual. So after a little bit of research, I was able to determine that this is not the well-established fact that this individual is making it out to be. There's actually conflicting sources on this subject. Some say that there's more than 10, others say that there's less than 10. So I went over a list of 10 to see if I could eliminate any of the organs on the list. I noticed that one of the organs on that list was the stomach. Here's the thing. There actually are people alive right now here on planet Earth who do not have a stomach. It's been surgically removed for one medical reason or another. I guess the main reason I'm aware of is stomach cancer. So what the surgeon has done in this kind of situation is after removing the stomach, they just attach the esophagus directly to the small intestine. Now, this is not to imply that the stomach is useless. It's certainly very helpful in the digestive process. You're typically going to be better off with one than without one, but you technically don't need one to survive. In fact, the very first stomach to exist in our evolutionary ancestry would have only been a temporary stomach, one that wasn't really necessary for survival. It was just used to break down larger than usual meals. Another organ appearing on the list of 10 supposedly vital organs is the pancreas. Guess what? There are people alive right now who don't have a pancreas. It's been surgically removed. There are people alive right now who don't have a small intestine. It's been surgically removed. There are people alive right now who don't have a large intestine. Okay? These are all organs appearing on that list of 10 supposedly vital organs. Now, don't get me wrong. You do need some semblance of a digestive system. You don't want to remove all of it, but you can at least remove part of it, as long as you have access to up-to-date medical science, which, of course, our ancient evolutionary ancestors did not have access to up-to-date medical science. No, many of them actually had access to something better than that, the ability to regenerate lost organs. In fact, something important to keep in mind here is that regenerative capabilities are actually useful in asexual reproduction, okay? Because remember, from an evolutionary standpoint, the first life forms would have been self-replicating single-celled organisms, and then, when we get multicellular organisms, they actually are still capable of reproducing in the same way. Just as a cell can divide and become two different cells, a multicellular organism can divide and become two different multicellular organisms. Okay, and so there actually are a lot of organisms, even to this day, there's still a lot of organisms. They have the ability to reproduce not only asexually, but also sexually, okay? That's a necessary transition when going from strictly asexual reproduction to strictly sexual reproduction, is having organisms that have the ability to do both. A great living example of this would be a sea anemone. Sea anemones are capable of sexual reproduction, but at the same time, let's say you're to cut a sea anemone in half. Well, those halves will regrow the lost parts, and so you'll just wind up with two different sea anemones.
Either those 10 vital organs came together all at once, creation, or they evolved separately. Fact. If they evolved separately, they must have had an order of evolution. Fact. For evolution to be even considered to qualify as a hypothetical hypothesis, there must be a plausible or feasible explanation as to the evolutionary order that would be possible. For example, what comes first?
Well, it depends. It depends on how you're using certain words. What is it that makes something this organ or that one? What qualifies something as a heart or a brain or a stomach or skin? In fact, I recently was watching this documentary on the evolution of skin that seemed to be putting forward this idea that skin was some kind of bone mutation that doesn't really come along until the rise of vertebrate fish. But there are other sources that talk about skin as though it existed prior to that. Perhaps was even the very first organ. So basically, there would have been multicellular organisms that could have been seen as like sheets of skin crawling around absorbing minerals and bacteria. But while there are those of us who see these organisms as sheets of skin, there are others that just see them as clumps of cells. They don't think it's appropriate to label it as skin. And so for them, they might prefer to think of the stomach as the first organ.
Man is irreducibly complex, by definition.
Oh, really? Well, I'll just have to go look up a definition of irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity is the argument that certain biological systems cannot evolve by successive small modifications to pre-existing functional systems through natural selection. Irreducible complexity is central to the creationist concept of intelligent design, but it is rejected by the scientific community, which regards intelligent design as pseudoscience. So basically, irreducible complexity is a non-scientific idea invented by intelligent design theorists, and if you're going around saying that something is irreducibly complex, that's just your own arbitrary personal opinion that's not substantiated with any actual evidence.
Stomach, skin, heart, lungs, brain, upper intestine, liver, lower intestine, pancreas, kidneys. Remove just one and man dies. And bye-bye evolution.
Well, as we already established, not all those organs actually belong on that list. But what if we're talking about like a brain? Okay, you take away someone's brain, and yeah, they're going to die. But that doesn't debunk evolution. I mean, we have ancient evolutionary ancestors who, you would have been able to cut them in half, separating the head from the tail, and the head would have just grown a new tail, and the tail would have just grown a new head. Okay, there are organisms alive today. You can do that with like a flatworm. Okay. You just wind up with two flatworms instead of one. So the fact that humans have vital organs doesn't do anything to debunk evolution. It could, however, be used to debunk the concept of God. I mean, if God is this all-knowing, all-powerful being that doesn't require any vital organs of his own, then it doesn't make sense for him to go to the trouble of making them when he starts creating life forms. He can create life forms that don't require any organs.
So which one do we start with?
You already asked that question. I already responded to that.
Here, let me help you out. 1. Skin. 2. Stomach. 3. Brain. 4. Heart. You see? Whatever way you start, you cause more problems for the myth. Because all 10 need to be there, together, working in tandem at the same time.
No, they don't.
Atheists like to point out lungfish or nematodes that don't have all 10 organs as if that helps their case. It does not. Lungfish and nematodes are also irreducibly complex.
No, that's just an arbitrary opinion. Okay, part of the reason lungfish are good to talk about here is because they have both gills and lungs. This would seem to be a necessary transition from organisms that have only gills and no lungs to organisms that have only lungs and no gills.
So unless you can show a feasible or plausible pathway for them to turn into a human, they are a non sequitur. Therefore, if unique common ancestor for all flora and fauna were to somehow be true, and if we slowly go back in time, our ancestors would at some point have 9 interdependent vital organs, then 8, then 7, then 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. The math is not hard here. Allow me to give you a big head start. I will allow you to start with abiogenesis. Quite generous, don't you think? And a bag of skin. Now you have 1 billion years to turn it into a man. What are the next steps in the evolutionary ladder? Come on, just give me something.
All right, I'll give you an educational animation and add some helpful commentary. Starting with clumps of cells that could also be considered sheets of multifunction skin, we have the ability to produce temporary stomachs. Then we have the formation of more permanent stomachs that actually gradually elongate into something more along the lines of what we might consider an intestine. Meanwhile, the beginning of the first brain was developing in an organism that's capable of regrowing a lost head. Not long afterward, we have the beginnings of the first heart. Next, we have either the liver or the kidneys. I'd have to do more research to be clearer about which one is actually next, but I believe after that is when we get the beginnings of the pancreas. Then we see the emergence of the first lungs. It's also around this time that we can begin to divide the intestine into a large intestine and a small intestine, as well as a new stomach. So that would seem to cover all 10 of those supposedly vital organs. I'm not confident the order I provided is 100% accurate, but it's at least roughly correct-ish. That said, it's important to keep in mind that the perception that we have separate organs is just that, a perception. Technically, they're not separate. They're really all part of an interconnected multifunction system, and it is that system that is evolving. Now, we'll of course divide that system into more manageable chunks, so we'll speak of a nervous system and a digestive system, a respiratory system, etc. But those divisions are based on different functions of the same overarching interconnected system. But it's through the production of different organs that the system is able to allocate its different pre-existing functions to different parts of the body.
Let us analyze it together using logic and critical thinking. You guys are starting to make me think this really isn't about science anymore, rather a religious belief in godless metaphysical naturalism.
Oh yeah, because lying down under the problem and saying God did it is so much more science-y than researching all the evidence for evolution.
A microbe has 0 interdependent interlocked vital organs and their support systems. A microbiologist has 10 interdependent interlocked vital organs and their support systems. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The math is simple here. On the billion-year journey from organless microbes to organ-dependent microbiologists, there had to be an order, unless you believe that all 10 evolved at the exact same moment, aka creationism. Stomach, skin, heart, lungs, brain, upper and lower intestine, liver, pancreas, kidneys. The inability to answer this simple question is what reduces the microbes to microbiologist fairy tale to the joke that it is. www.evolutionfairytale.com. Try again?
Actually, I feel I've sufficiently answered your question.
The problem is, all of the observable creatures that we see are fully formed, complete, and complex that merely vary or adapt. For example, there are 5,000 species of ladybugs, 2,000 species of cichlids, 9,000 species of birds, 6,000 species of lizards. Where is the evolution? Nowhere!
Okay, there's actually an abundance of evidence for evolution. We've, of course, already discussed some of it. On top of that, though, we know that from one generation to the next, organisms will become genetically more dissimilar. So, you're more closely related to your parents than you are to your grandparents. You're more closely related to your grandparents than you are to your great-grandparents, right? And we know for a fact that with enough genetic drift, organisms will speciate. They will become separate species. But what is it more specifically that makes this organism a species separate from this other organism? Well, it has to do with whether or not they can reproduce with each other. So, hypothetical scenario. Let's say we did some sex experiments involving male humans and female chimpanzees. If we had a whole bunch of different male humans trying to impregnate a bunch of different female chimpanzees and none of them were successful, then that would confirm our suspicions that humans and chimpanzees are two separate species. Okay, we have already given humans and chimpanzees two different species names, despite the fact that we don't have any of these sex experiments on the books between them. I mean, who would want to, right? But no offense, chimpanzees, right? But let's say we did these experiments, and these humans were successfully able to impregnate these female chimpanzees. Well, that actually all by itself would not be enough to determine that we're the same species. We'd have to go off of whether or not the human-chimpanzee hybrids were able to reproduce with each other. So if the male hybrids successfully impregnate the female hybrids, that will be enough for us to determine, okay, humans and chimpanzees have actually been the same species this whole time. The differences between them are basically on par with the differences between the different breeds of dogs that we see or something like that. It's roughly similar to that situation. But if none of the male hybrids are capable of impregnating any of the female hybrids, that will confirm our suspicions that humans and chimpanzees are two separate species. That being said, we have done a number of sex experiments with a variety of different domesticated animals. Not experiments where humans are having sex with animals, but experiments with domesticated animals having sex with each other. So an example would be with donkeys and horses. Okay, donkeys and horses are understood as two separate species. They're two closely related species, but they're still considered two separate species. They're genetically similar enough that they can reproduce with each other, but what they produce is an evolutionary dead end. It's called a mule. There are male mules and female mules, and mules cannot reproduce with each other. Okay, a male mule cannot impregnate a female mule. Okay, mules can reproduce with other donkeys or horses. They just cannot reproduce with each other. That being said, our experiments with controlled selective breeding can actually help give us insights into the processes of natural selection. Controlled selective breeding has shown us that quite a bit of variation is possible within a species over a relatively short period of time, which demonstrates that even more variation is possible across different species over significantly longer periods of time. On top of that, there are certain traits exhibited by our evolutionary ancestors that we do not retain to this day. We do, however, retain the genes for those traits. It's just that those genes are inactive. But every now and then, like every once in a rare while, due to some freak of nature or whatever, someone will actually be born with these genes activated. So, for example, we have tail-growing genes because some of our ancestors had the ability to grow tails. Okay, so every once in a rare while, someone will be born with a tail because those genes have been activated. Birds have genes for growing teeth, and so in laboratory settings, scientists have actually successfully gotten chickens to grow teeth just by activating those genes. Which brings us now to transitional fossils. You had brought up that there's a bunch of different species of birds and lizards. Well, you might have heard that there's actually a number of dinosaur fossils that can actually be seen as transitions from reptile to bird. Likewise, we got fossils that show a transition from fish to land-dwelling reptiles, right? We got those walking fish, fossils of fish with feet, okay? We have fossils that show a transition from reptile to mammal, fossils that show a transition from rodent to monkey, fossils showing a transition from monkey to human, right? Whole bunch of different transitional fossils.
But here is the catch. By going back into the nebulosphere of long ago and far away, they're trying to use slow, minute changes to account for a microbe turning into a microbiologist. What good is a barely or partially formed vital organ?
Well, actually, as we already established, a lot of our ancient evolutionary ancestors, if they had wound up with only part of an organ, they would have been able to regenerate it. That being said, you got to keep in mind that organs that are vital to us right now were not necessarily as vital to us when they first started forming. Okay, take for example with the lung. Okay, the first lung to come into existence was not necessarily vital to the survival of fish. Okay, fish could get their oxygen through their gills. Okay, they didn't need to get it through a lung. The lung was just another way to get oxygen by going into a different environment.
My thesis here puts everything in perspective. As of now, no one has even tried to answer it. Like to try?
Consider it answered. Alright, hopefully you guys found this video helpful. If you're interested in helping me out, I do have a Patreon account linked down below in the description box. You can go there and donate if you want to. That's it for this video, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and share it with other people. If you're interested in watching my future videos, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And I will see you all in the next one. So have a good one, guys, and peace.